Hello and welcome to Ultimate Brains. I'm your host Lucas and today we're with Troy. And of course, the brain.
Hello Lucas, hello Troy.
Troy's been in this industry for a long time, so today we're going to be talking about how to put on a show. What is stage terminology, Troy?
So stage terminology is specific to words and phrases that we use in the theatre that don't probably get used outside of those four walls, so it's people learning the specific words that we use. So a few, for example, would be a raked stage. Now what a rake means is that the stage is on a slight slope from the back to the front, so it angles downwards towards the audience and the seating, things like that. A fly floor, for example. So when you're sat watching a show and you see sort of the box where you can see it, above that, out of view of the audience, above the stage is a fly floor where all the cloths and the pieces of set would be flown up. Things like flattage. So when you're on stage and you've got bits of set, and it might be the front of a cottage, for example, that sort of thing. That's generally made out of wood and it's flat so that it can be stacked and moved around quite easily, and that's why it's called a flat.
Makes sense.
Wings, not chicken wings, like wings in the theatre. So that's basically when you go off stage to either of the sides, they are called wings, and that's you waiting to come on or off. It's usually in very dark light, waiting to come on. For performers, things like standing in a hot spot, excuse me. So when you get asked to stand under the lighting, making sure that the audience can see you in the light, you would have to stand under the hot spot, and what that means is that you would feel the hottest part of the light on your face when you're stood there, so that it can be...
So they're all, when you know, they all sort of make sense. You said cloths. When you say cloths, what does that sort of mean?
So a cloth is a backdrop to a scene that's happening. It won't be the only thing that's on stage, there'll be set, but it's basically a huge canvas that would cover the entire width of the stage, and it would be painted or printed to sort of match the scene that you're doing. You know, it could be a street scene or a laundry scene, that sort of thing.
Fair enough. Makes sense, I suppose. So I've been in and around theatres for quite a while, but one thing that always confuses me personally is stage directions. There's so many different ways of explaining which section of the stage to be on. What is stage directions and why are they so complicated?
So stage directions come across maybe as complicated because depending on where you stood, whether you stood in the auditorium or whether you stood on the stage, they can be opposite to what you mean. So for example, if you're a performer and you're stood on the stage and I was to ask you as a director to go stand stage left, stage left means if you are stood on the stage facing the audience, you go to your left, to the left of the stage. If you go stage right, you would go to the right of the stage. Downstage would be towards the front of the stage where the audience are, and then upstage would be moving backwards away from the audience. The reason why it can be a little bit complicated is because if you are not stood on the stage, if you're stood in the auditorium watching them perform, it's the opposite way around. So if I'm stood looking at the stage and I ask someone to go to stage left, that is my right. Yeah. Because they're going to their left. Yeah. So there's two different types of terminology that we've got: stage directions and you've got audience directions. So you would have audience left, audience right, which would be as you look at the stage going that way. But generally it's the stage directions.
Stage directions.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Say it's just perspective, innit? It's
so if you've got stage, you're on stage.
You're on stage.
And then if you're facing out, the direction is as you look at it. So it's left, right.
Suppose it makes sense, doesn't it?
Downstage and upstage.
So one of the other things that our audience wants to know is, how do you play to an audience? So you're putting on a show. How do you pick what show to put on? How do you manage that as a director?
So choosing what show that you would put on, I think generally when you're working with groups, if you've been working with groups for a long time and you've got a baseline cast that sort of come back time and time again, then you have to think about what the strengths and weaknesses are of the cast that you've got as a regular baseline group. Obviously, you'll get additional people coming and joining and things, but you've got to think about size of the cast, how many parts does it need to have, or how many would you like it to have, how many lines do you want people to have, is it a musical, is it a play, you know, do we need dancing in it, that sort of thing. And then, I mean, a lot of the shows are very different, so having, you know, sort of a more of an operatic musical, then you've got to think about that. It takes some very strong vocal ability, you might need a live band, that sort of thing. Whereas if you're going more down a pop sort of side, you can potentially use backing tracks and have some support with that to make it a little bit easier for the cast and things. So it's about knowing as a director what you've already got and where your strengths lie, and then play it into that. Obviously, as again, it's what's popular at the time, what's available to actually be able to put on. But knowing your cast.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly considerable amount to think about when deciding what show to put on. Obviously, there's, say, if you've got a small group with lots of children, then you're going to put on a musical not like Les Mis or Phantom of the Opera.
Exactly, yeah.
It's relatable to...
And you can't expect really small children to perform sort of full-size adult parts and sort of mix it around a little bit, because it requires quite a lot of commitment from that side. So yeah, you have to make it fit.
Yeah. So I've got an idea. Why don't we ask the brain? What's the most popular show, Brain?
Thinking. Determining the most popular stage production is subjective, considering factors like audience attendance, critical acclaim, cultural impact, or financial success. Popularity can vary across regions and demographic groups and change over time. Notable productions include The Phantom of the Opera, one of the longest-running and most successful worldwide; Les Miserables, widely praised for its powerful storytelling and emotional impact; The Lion King, a major success for its stunning visuals and iconic music; Hamilton, gained immense popularity for its innovative storytelling, musical blending, and cultural significance; Wicked, a hit for its imaginative take on the Wizard of Oz story.
So there's some considerable shows there, some rather big musicals there.
I mean, they're very big shows. Yeah. And, you know, in a professional environment, if you're sort of in an in-house theatre where you're not moving, or if you're going out on tour, then things like the size of the show and the amount of set required definitely determines that. Because with The Lion King, you've got a zoo worth of animals to have to take around with you, and you need very specific puppeteers and things like that.
Absolutely.
So it definitely comes into play. But with an amateur sort of group perspective, those really big shows that require a lot of funding and things, then you kind of have to consider what the right balance is. Yeah.
No, 100%. So I've decided what show I'm doing. I'm ready to put on this show. Obviously, one of the first things I'm going to need to do is auditions. I need to figure out the cast. I need to figure out who I've got, who I'm going to work with. So how would you go about holding auditions? What have you found that works for you when putting on shows?
So again, it's you to an extent you'll have a baseline group that sort of return, you know, week in, week out to sort of the lessons, rehearsals, things like that when you're doing stuff. But I think with an audition, you've got to sit down and think, what do I want? What do I want to get out of this? So if I'm doing a brand new show that requires a certain type of vocal technique, or we need somebody that's really good at the sort of dramatic side or the comedy side, things like that. So I'd then tailor the audition piece to that sort of thing. But from an amateur perspective, I would provide a script or a monologue to learn. So I would say, choose from these are the different sort of character types that are available. Here's the different songs that you can choose from, and sort of let them have a small pool of choice to pick and make it their own. And then obviously open it up. We always open it up to the public as well and get some new talent. That's often quite the way we find new people to join the group. And then when we actually go into the audition, it'll be myself, and if it's a musical, I'll have a singing teacher or a singing coach with me. And then we'll be looking for confidence, and ability to maybe learn the lines. Because obviously depending on how big you want that part to be, whether they're capable of learning that many lines. and then singing and things like that. So obviously the vocal capability and all that gets taken into consideration to be able to make that decision.
No, absolutely. Say there's so much to consider that I never even thought about. So one of the things that we've done previously is we quite often have a lot of kids in our shows and the musicals that you've put on. So obviously when we've got shows on for possibly a week, 2 weeks, whatever, how long can kids be on stage for? Because obviously there's got to be some sort of rules. Maybe we should ask the brain as to how long we should actually, how long kids are legally allowed to work for versus how long morally they perhaps. So brain, how long can kids work for on a stage?
Thinking. The regulations regarding the hours that a child can work in the theatre in the UK are outlined in the Children Performances and Activities Regulations 2014. They set limits on the hours and times during which children can perform, as well as requirements for breaks and rest periods. Some key points are: children under school leaving age are generally limited to a maximum of 5 hours of performance per day. The total daily hours, including rest breaks and performance time, are subject to specific regulations. Children must have breaks and rest periods during rehearsals and performances. The regulations specify the duration and frequency of breaks based on the age of the child. The regulations also address the issue of school attendance, ensuring that the child's education is not unduly compromised.
And that's absolutely right. That is working a little bit more towards the professional production side. What you would tend to have, especially in big musicals with children, like Matilda and things like that, or Annie, you would have multiple groups of children. So you would have the adult cast that run all the way through, and then you would have, say, group A and B of children, and they would swap out. They would maybe do 2 shows 1 week, 3 shows, and then they'd swap, and group B would do 2 shows. And then,
I suppose it makes sense. Like they've still got to do school. They've still got to get the basic.
It all has to work around that. But the laws around how long they're allowed to spend in the theatre actively working. Obviously, it requires multiple groups. From an amateur standpoint, the rehearsals are done after school. And that's not really an issue. But then when it goes into the theatre, we obviously have chaperones and things like that for the welfare of the children. But amateur runs, really, that sort of within a week or 2 weeks, not done every night, don't require that level of organisation. Changing.
That's fair enough. So we've got a cast. We've decided what show, which is a good level to be at. We're looking at putting this show on. We want it to look the best it possibly can for our audience. How do you go about deciding the set and the backdrop?
So if you are hiring a show and you've purchased a script from a company, then it will give you an indication as to what it needs to look like. Obviously, the scenes will be set out. Scene 1 needs to be a woodland scene, for example, that sort of thing. So you have to go through the script, sit and go through it scene by scene, work out what everything needs to look like. Then I need to sit and make a decision as to whether I'm going to do that with cloths, which is what we spoke about before, whether I'm going to use set, props, things like that. And then at that point, I would then go out into the internet, which is a wonderful thing, and contact all the companies and groups that we've worked with over the years and build up contacts to say, I need this type of set, do you have it? Or if it isn't something that we have as a whole, piece it together with lots of different parts to make it.
No, absolutely. Say we've spoke considerably about musicals, but obviously we put on pantomime once a year. What's the difference between a musical set and backdrops versus what you'd put on at a pantomime? Is there any difference, or what is the difference?
I mean, physically, in terms of set, I would say that a pantomime is a lot heavier in terms of the props that get used, because it's a lot more physical. Not for everything, but for the most part, it's a lot more physical. I think the set, whether you're allowed to fly, makes a big difference as to how much set you can have on, because you've got to think that I need to be able to change from this scene to this scene in a few seconds, and it can't take minutes and minutes to go through. So all that has to be taken into consideration. You could fill the stage up with everything, it'd be amazing. But if it took you 10 minutes to change it, it's not feasible. It loses that effect. But between pantomimes and musicals, obviously the pantomime is a bit more exaggerated in its set. It's a lot more colourful, and it's bigger. But in terms of the physical aspect of it, they're quite similar. Fair
enough. So one of the things that, obviously you've got your set, one of the things that you mentioned about being colourful, a very important aspect of that is lighting. I think it's quite a confusing area of the theatre. There's so many different variations of it. There's different words for it. So things like spotlights, moving heads, just go into a little bit of detail for us regarding how would you light a show? How do you decide what lighting you need for each show?
So it's difficult, and it's very easy to get wrong as well, because if you imagine when you're watching a film and things like that, it's the background and the set that make the emotion of the movie, of what's happening at that particular point. So what you have to do is be able to recreate that on a stage in a great big open void. So we would, there's some very basic things like a warm and a cold wash. So that's white light. So you would be looking at, if it was warm, it's more yellow and warm. If it was a cold wash, it's very white and almost got that blue sort of hue to it. Obviously the colours make a difference. You wouldn't, if somebody was really happy and doing something, you wouldn't make it really dark and red. You know, you have to, whatever the emotion the actor is trying to get across, you need to be able to recreate that visually in a scene, and things like that. Again, spotlights, if you want the audience's focus to be on a specific part, you would put a spotlight in, get the cast member to stand in the hot spot, and then...
No, absolutely. It's as you say, it's portraying that emotion that they're trying to put on stage to the audience. So obviously something that goes hand in hand with that is sound, the audio side of things. The lighting and the audio are always together, sort of thing. So a bit of the basics about sound, because there's quite a few different terminology and aspects of sound as well.
So I mean, it's all well and good having an amazing show, but if you can't hear what's going on, it's ruined a little bit, isn't it? So I think, again, in a professional environment, everybody has individual microphones. And you can have lapel microphones, which would go on the lapel of a jacket if needed, or a lavalier, which what you would probably see in a lot of musicals is where it's worn on the face or the head. So it would normally go under a wig, poke out the top, or maybe come down the side, pick it up. When you've got a big cast, or you're working with children or people that aren't used to using those microphones, then it's sometimes easier to have stage mics rather than individuals. So they're called shotgun mics or condenser microphones, which is basically a long tubular microphone that's got a really wide aspect to it of pickup. So it means you could put, you know, a few across the front of the stage, maybe hang a couple from the bars above, and it will pick up a wide spectrum of noise. It allows everybody to be heard. If you're doing group numbers, it will pick everybody up. The disadvantage to that is because it's so wide, it will pick everything up. So if you can't instill a good backstage work ethic into them, where when they go off the quiet and someone's rooting around looking for a shoe, it's going to pick it up and they're going to hear it. So it's easier, it's cheaper, but it requires a lot more dedication from the team.
So moving on from that, as you say, the stage etiquette, the quietness, stage safety and sort of the expectations and protocols. Obviously, stage safety is a massive thing when you're working with children, so Matilda, stuff like that. What sort of aspects are there to the stage safety and protocols on stage? What's expected?
So, giving a good understanding before we even get into the theatre, especially when you're working with either amateurs or children. I mean, it needs to be reminded to everybody at all times, no matter what level you're working at. But understanding where they're allowed to go in the venue, when they get there, when they're allowed on stage. What we'll often has when we're doing a fit up, so when we're getting the set ready, hanging cloths, we'll put barriers or chains down the side of the wings to stop people being able to get onto the stage. One across the front to stop people falling off. When you're busy and you're working flat out and there's lots of things happening, it's easy to lose sort of track of where you are. So having those physical things there helps. A big thing that we have as well with the fly floor is hanging stuff. Obviously there's a high, not possibility, but there's a chance of things falling. So it's good to have that knowledge of what works up. And when you have flymen, there's actually an old thing where it's unlucky or it's frowned upon to whistle in the theatre. So what that stems back to is back when theatre first became a thing and they had people flying, they used hemp rope to do it. But the only people that had really good experience with flying things was sailors because of the rigging and things like that. So what they did is they brought sailors into the theatre to fly cloths and everything. But sailors, when they're out at sea, being multinational and things like that, rather than talking, they used to whistle to each other to be able to communicate with what's moving. That then came into the theatre. But as a safety aspect, when someone's whistling, that means something is moving above your head. So it was frowned upon that only people that were trained in that area and that fly whistle, because then that's the communication piece, and it just makes sure that people are being safe.
Fair enough. So if you ever find yourself on a stage, make sure you're not whistling, 'cause you might get a piece of set on your head. Right, so obviously we're putting on this show. How do you go about selecting the actual script itself? So there might be variations of the script. So for example, Les Mis, there's Les Mis or there's Les Mis Junior.
Yep.
So how would you go about selecting that script specifically for your group?
So there's a few different aspects really that you can sort of choose from. There's plays that are within the public domain, so that's ones that have been active for over a certain amount of years that then become public usage, so you can use it without having to pay for it.
Yep.
There is the full production of a musical, like Matilda, for example, or you get Matilda Junior. Now, not everyone offers that, but a lot of the big companies that are the baseline for hiring out musicals have an option for both. Now, the full production is a 2-hour show with an interval all the way through. A junior version would tend to be a 1-act play, so it would just be maybe an hour and 10 minutes long, no interval. Obviously, the lines are massively reduced, the songs, the dancing, and it's to allow younger younger cast members to be able to put on a production. Some of the stipulations with that is that with a junior production, you can't have anyone over the age of 18 performing in it.
Yes, there is still restrictions.
So again, it all boils back to the cast that you've got, the age range, and whether that would work or whether you're capable of putting on that full production.
Yes, so obviously with the different shows, I'd imagine there's quite a large cost implication for each script. So I wonder what sort of the average script costs in the UK. Brain, do you know?
Thinking. To determine the licence fee for a stage show in the UK, you would need to contact the licensing agent, publisher, or rights holder associated with that particular production. They will provide information on the fees, terms, and conditions for obtaining the performance rights. Common factors that may influence the licence fee include type of production, whether it's a professional, amateur, educational, or community production, the total number of performances planned for the production. Some licence fees are based on a percentage of ticket sales or the seating capacity of the venue and the length of time the production is authorised to run.
So you can see as we're going through this, there is quite a large cost to putting on shows with, say, the set. And finishing us off, one of the things that I'd imagine quite a lot of the budget could go into is costumes. It's arguably one of the most important things because it not only does it put the image across the audience, but it also makes the cast their character. It makes them feel like they're the person they're trying to portray. Yeah. So costumes and wardrobes, musicals, pantomimes, how do you pick what costumes you want people to wear?
So again, I think exactly what you've said there, when you're working with a more amateur group, if you like, having that costume and putting it on makes you feel like you're in that character. So depending on what that type of person is, whether they're a soldier, whether they're a dame in a pantomime or the hero or the comedy character, that costume needs to match their personality for that show. So if they're a comedy role in a pantomime, it needs to be bright, colourful, silly, things that they can move and do around. If you're moving into a play where you're a businessman, you need to feel sharp and astute and, make it feel like that's what you're doing. A lot of groups have build-up costumes over the years of doing it. Yeah. You buy things, you keep them, you reuse them, and a lot of local groups in local areas are willing to hire out and swap and move around costumes. We do that a lot with local groups that we do and have got contacts with, so it's always worth sort of contacting your local people to see what's available.
So it's got like its own community. The theatre and the arts have their own community.
Oh, absolutely,
and everyone works together. I think that's quite important. Yeah. Well, that concludes today's episode. So thank you very much for everyone that's watching, and thank you very much to you, Troy, for coming. You've clearly got a lot of knowledge. So from the brain,
goodbye.
And from me, thank you very much for watching another episode of Ultimate Brains.